At Five Star Bank, community is at the heart of what we do. Every day we strive to have thoughtful solutions for our customers and help our communities prosper. Honest dialogue about the issues affecting the region is vitally important to that prosperity. We are proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
There's a school at UC Davis that has a world-renowned reputation for its prowess in medicine. It ranks number 2 in the United States, treats 40,000 patients each year, and is a leading contributor to the study of viruses. We're talking about the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine, a leading institution in areas ranging from disease control to food safety. Joining us today to discuss what's new in veterinary medicine and how the field affects us and our pets' lives is Dean Michael Larimore. Dean Larimore, what is the relationship between the school and our friendly neighborhood vet?
Well, one of the ways that the school interacts to solve society's problems is really to be able to approach it in a One Health fashion. And what we mean by that...
One Health, what does that mean?
Well, it's really the interface between animals, people, and the environment. And we often find ourselves in that situation as veterinarians. We're trained in comparative medicine, we're trained in areas of agriculture, and often our problems that we face in society mean that we have to interact both on the animal health side, but also on the people and the environment side as well.
This One Health concept intrigues me. Give us sort of a idea of in an example, how holistically this
Absolutely.
manifests itself.
Sure. Well, one of the ways we often think of One Health is emerging viruses is a good example. About 3/4 of the emerging viruses are called zoonotic diseases.
Zoonotic.
Yeah, and that means they cross between animals and people. And very often we hear in the news about things like avian influenza, which is a good example. And often veterinarians are involved on the animal health side in detecting at the very origin of those in the places where those diseases first happen, but also in the study of those. And then we have to work with our medical school colleagues, our public health officials, those in the environment of the animal that we're dealing with. So emerging viruses, that means we have to go to those locations.
It's always been a common assumption that what happens in animal populations disease-wise really didn't mean anything because those were animals and we're humans. And even though we're all animals, there's always been just a premise that one didn't affect the other. Increasingly, we hear about this in the news. How have studies advanced?
Well, it's interesting. It's actually an older concept.
Really?
If we go back into medicine, the original practitioners of medicine as an art did not hesitate to go between animals and people.
Really?
The fathers of surgery, for example, studied diseases in animals in addition to people. It was only much later that the fields separated into two fields. What we're finding today, the advances mean that we actually need to work together to solve the problems, such as food safety, to problems related to cancer. We find ourselves both informing each other and bridging into other disciplines as well, such as engineering.
Now, one of the areas that you just mentioned, food safety, I wouldn't naturally think that food safety would be related to the School of Veterinary Medicine. Where's that connection come from?
Well, we train veterinarians in the public health field, so they're trained to be inspectors of our food, for example. USDA, for example, employs many veterinarians as inspectors of our food. But in addition to that, we train a lot of veterinarians that are involved in everything from the microbiologists that study foodborne pathogens, or they might study the mechanisms that we do to grow our food or to produce our food. And in that interface, they often are working with many other individuals from other disciplines in public health to agriculture to really find the best ways to produce a healthy consumer wholesome product.
That's fascinating. Now, I remember a couple years ago there was this scare related to salad or spinach salad.
That's right. In 2006 there was a major outbreak of a contaminative spinach, which all of us felt when we went into a restaurant and we couldn't order salad. because of the embargo.
That's right. Spinach was like banned everywhere, right?
That's right. And because of that, it was realized that that was a very complex problem, one that involved a contaminated field, so they found the source of that, but the real question was, how did it get there? And to solve that problem, it took veterinarians, but it also took public health officials, it took the farmers, it took even folks that understood the hydrology, the water under the surface of the earth, in order to find out how did the plants get contaminated. And from that really grew out major collaborations. We have a Western Institute of Food Safety, which we work closely with agriculture, which often involves the leafy green vegetable side as well as the animal health side.
And because UC Davis is known so much for its work in food and agriculture, this, by accident, housing of the School of Veterinary Medicine with its food and agricultural emphasis, what does that create in terms of collaboration and partnership between the two schools that's meaningful for us as consumers?
Well, I think one of the things that it's interesting that the School of Veterinary Medicine, which was formed in 1948, really grew out of the need in agriculture. So the animal diseases that the state faced at that time really led to a call for a school devoted to veterinary medicine. And so working closely with agriculture, we often find ourselves working with our colleagues in agriculture, because when we raise animals in the environments that we need to grow them in a healthy way, we often know that they're involving the feed sources, for example, to the transportation, to controlling diseases within a population. So we have to work closely together, especially when there's a concern for the public safety.
Now, in terms of, you talk about feedstock and things like that, you all do work in flavor as well. And,
That's right.
And the flavor piece of this, which is again between you all and the School of Food and Ag, how is that showing up on our plates or in our diets?
Well, one way it might show up is the fact that we might be working with the animal scientist to how to best produce a source of food that is palatable to people. But of course there is a huge pet food industry. And the industry in general, there was over $55 billion spent on the pet industry.
And it gets more expensive every single day, let me tell you.
Yeah, it seems that way. But in fact, and I can attest to that by my cats, they do get picky. But so part of it is also the pet food industry as well as the food for people.
Okay. And those advances that you all are making and studying every single day, how is it changing how we care for our pets? You know, in one example, there you do things like jaw replacements and things like that, but in the past, your dog or cat got ill, and at a certain point, you just had to put them down.
That's right.
What's happening today?
Well, one of the unique things about UC Davis is we work very closely with our colleagues in other fields and to solve problems. A good example is bioengineering. When we have dogs with cancer, as you mentioned, in the past, it was very difficult if they had a cancer of their jaw, for example, of how we deal with that. But what we know today is that we have materials working closely with our colleagues in bioengineering and the School of Medicine that we can use to replace, for example, when the jawbone is removed from a cancer, that will actually regrow bone, literally within weeks.
Regrow bone?
That's right.
Does that work in humans too?
That's right. It has a direct application. The information that we learn about what these matrices are produced and how well they implant, how well they recapitulate or replace the bone that's lost, really actually informs us to raise the standard of care in pets in that case so that they live longer, but also informs our colleagues on the medical school side because they need those same kinds of techniques in bone replacement of people.
Now, that opens a door to a long-standing debate related to animal testing. And I've heard many sides to this argument, but in terms of how the School of Veterinary Medicine treats its animals and the animals that it engages with in pursuit of its studies, what can you share with us?
Well, there's a whole range on the side Of course, the veterinary oath, in addition to relieve the pain and suffering of animals, we also have an obligation to advance biomedical science. It's in our oath, it's part of our training. And part of that means research on animals for animals' sake, of course, just as I mentioned on the oncology side. Those often involve clinical trials, much the same as what we have in people. So after the standard of care is established, for example, in oncology or infectious disease, we need to discover new treatments to get better. And often that involves closely working with our clients who come into our hospital. And so it's much like what you would have if you entered into a hospital and they ask you to be part of a clinical trial. And what we do is we get permit to try a new advancement, and often, as in that example of the cancer treatment, an advancement which increases their likelihood of that particular patient, but also we learn more about what future patients might gather from that information. On the experimental side, of course, our role is to be the safeguard of pain and suffering in animals in the necessary use of animals. Most of them are mice, and involving the testament and treatment of and evaluation of drugs, for example. That
well, what say you to the critics who say that animal testing is unnecessary, that it's archaic and a relic of a bygone era, and with technological advancements that we have today, that it's really unnecessary and just kind of doing things the way they've always been done?
Well, I think it's important to note that we feel the same way. We often have what we call 3 R's, reduction, refinement, and replacement of animal models. And so we're constantly looking at how we can do that. And it's important to also know that because of the complex questions that we're faced with in the physiology of the animal, that it can't be replaced solely with computer models. And so we are in the position that we have to use animals to answer questions before those medicines or treatments can be used in children, for example. We wouldn't want to have the first application of a drug that hadn't been tested in animals to be used directly in people. We went through that in the 1950s with thalidomide, and with devastating results. We saw the limbless babies being born, and we don't want to go back to those days. So we want to have a thoughtful relief of pain and suffering, a minimal amount of animal testing, but the right kind of models to get at the question more quickly.
Now, how did you first get involved in this field?
Well, I was a child who, probably from watching too many Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, got interested.
You're dating yourself. I watched those same shows. Marlon Perkins.
So I went up to my parents at the age of 15 and said I wanted to be a veterinarian. And they said, great, what is that? They had not ever gone to college. I was the first in my family to go to college. And so I was fortunate to have good mentors. Started working as a kennel boy. And because of that, was able to have enough background to go to the University of Missouri, where I did my veterinary degree, and went into practice 2 years, and was very satisfied in practice, but I knew that there were other things. I'd worked in a small project in veterinary school, and so I was intrigued by going back and learning more.
And your specialty is retrovirus.
That's correct.
And just for the record, what's a retrovirus?
Well, it's a virus that's unique. It goes in the reverse direction. So it starts with RNA and goes back to DNA. And by doing so, it's able to incorporate within our DNA. And huge problem for both animals and people with retroviruses. HIV, the most prominently known retrovirus. I worked with the ones that caused cancer in people, HTLV1, which also is the same family that causes cancer in cattle.
And its relationship, is it ever the case where it is that retroviruses are actually passed up from animals like cattle into humans through the food supply? There
are instances with viruses that jump between species. Retroviruses have that history as well. The origin of the HIV virus is believed to have been from a simian species. And so that's one example. People right now are continuing to study that problem in remote locations globally.
Do you think that we as a society take the potential of those diseases seriously enough?
I think we do. We have a number of safeguards. Of course, we're very interested in our food supply, as you mentioned, in terms of viruses crossing over, but also we have large grants. We have a grant from the United States USAID And what that does is really safeguard against pandemics globally. And so we have scientists working globally, actually in places like Africa, Bolivia, multiple parts in the world, screening for viruses that could be the next pandemic.
And your students, in terms of their studies themselves, you're talking about Africa, coming to the community itself. How does the School of Veterinary Medicine engage in the community at the local level?
One of the ways that we do that is we try to expose our students to all aspects of their careers in veterinary medicine, which are vast. And that involves everything from practicing veterinarians in the community. For example, in addition to what they study at the veterinary school and the training that they receive and everything from communication to surgery, we also get them out into the community. We have a clinic in Sacramento called Mercer Clinic. And what it is a clinic that specifically serves those underserved populations that cannot afford veterinary care. We have a student club that goes down once a month and works closely with veterinarians in the clinic to provide free health care for those people that do not have the ability to afford a veterinarian.
And by the time they get out of school, they've all had some aspect of community service in this way?
That's right. We have a community practice and a community surgery both, with the idea to really replicate at the school what a community practice would look like, what their practicing veterinarian would be.
And the career that they're entering into today, these young graduates, how is it different than the career you entered into?
You know, some of it is very much the same. When I went to school, graduated in 1981, we practiced and looked at practice as a primary motivation for going to school. But even then, as it is even more now, we realize veterinarians' role in everything from global health to research to public health. And those aspects, what we're trying to do at UC Davis is really open up those opportunities for the students. So we have summer research programs, for example, where they're working with faculty. Over 30 students are working in multiple places from the laboratory to the field.
Wow. And in getting them out of the laboratory into the field itself, are they doing any work around some of the other issues that have come up recently related to food safety, where it is that we're talking about the storage of meat, the transfer of cleanliness within the facilities that process products?
Yeah, they're involved in pretty much any aspect that we have where our faculty are involved. And so, for example, they may be working here in California on problems related to the Central Valley, which is a very important agriculture region for us, working closely with the dairy industry. They may be looking at also those same kinds of questions, but outside of California. They may be working within the United States, but also internationally as well.
And what's exciting you most about some of the emerging trends within the field and that your institution is studying?
Well, I'm just amazed at the background of our students that come into us. They come with a wealth of worldly experiences.
Mostly U.S. students?
Most of our veterinary class, of course, most of them are from California, actually. We have about 1,200 applicants per year and accept a class of 138, so there's a lot of competition to get in, and most of them are from the United States. But what we really are ideally wanting to do is look like California. So our class, in terms of our diversity, in terms of the populations that we accept, we want them to mimic the populations of the society they'll be working in. Our graduate students, of course, which we have a lot of graduate students that work with us, come from all over the world. So do our residents as well.
And in terms of what's emerging in the field that has you the most excited, what are some of those things?
Well, there are some amazing things being done applying genetics and genomics, as they call it.
Really?
And what they're doing is sequencing, because of the type of technology that we're using with high throughput sequencing. We're partnering with folks like the Food and Drug Administration and Agilent and others to really take that technology and apply it to real-world problems. Right now we have a project called the 100K Genome Project. And what that means is we want to sequence up to 100,000 genomes from foodborne pathogens. And what that was in the past, we would sequence very small portions. And it would tell us good information, but when we sequence the entire bug's genome, we're now able to compare more quickly foodborne pathogens.
And what will that be meaningful for in terms of coming up with new treatments and
One of
things like
the
that?
immediate effects of that is a faster diagnosis. So if a foodborne pathogen is detected anywhere in California and we're able to sequence it that quickly, what that tells us is markers for how that might spread within the environment, and also how it might look to other known ones in the database, and be able to quickly determine if that's a threat or not.
Now that's interesting because typically those pathogens replicate themselves fairly quickly. So being able to get on them really quick can make the difference between a pandemic and really
Absolutely.
putting this thing in a box, right?
And that extends beyond California. Right now, for example, and it seems like almost weekly, we are discovering new viruses from around the world. The reason we're doing that is we're applying some of those same technologies, screening for these in the field before they get to us. Had we done that for the HIV epidemic in the 1950s, we knew the virus was there on look-back studies. We would have been much better able to handle the pandemic.
You know, one thing that's always fascinated me was, I know that livestock historically has gotten a lot of hormones to, for instance, with beef cattle, to plump them up, give them better marbling, that sort of thing. Hormones, antibiotics, things like that. What's the effect of all of those chemical treatments on things like a human condition right now, which is increasing resistance to antibiotics?
Well, that's of course a field which we're actively involved in.
Oh, really?
We have multiple laboratories involved in that to try to look at the goal is to produce the most wholesome consumer product, meaning that the idea would be to have animals produced without any antibiotics or any growth promotants, but have the kinds of animal and the quality of the food that's safe to the consumer. So we have both a diagnostic lab system and folks that are really looking at the antibiotic resistance to determine how quickly we can determine and make sure we don't have overuse of antibiotics, safe use of antibiotics, and if possible, lack of antibiotic use in the food supply.
Does it directly impact human resistance by having antibiotics in the food supply?
There is evidence of that. It's also important that the misuse from physicians also overprescribing antibiotics, another major factor in antibiotic resistance. So what you really want to look at is evidence-based medicine around that issue, so that you have both good data to suggest how did we get that resistance. Is it only from the food additives, or is it also from the environment or overprescribing?
There's also a concern that the genetic or the chemical alteration of basic foods, whether it be plant or animal, affects things like its nutritional value in humans and even its taste. Any thoughts on that?
Well, there are, of course, a very big controversy around genetically modified foods, as the whole field is known. And it's important to realize also that we've always had the cross of hybrid vigor with...
hybrid vigor?
Yeah, so that means crossing plants, for example, to get the better corn to be produced, or the better wheat product, or an insect-resistant wheat variety. And by using applications of genetics, we're able to pinpoint exactly what are some of those resistant factors. Hugely important if we're going to feed the 9 billion people on the planet by the year 2050.
And in terms of the modifications of animals themselves, no long-term concerns for how it affects human physical health?
Well, most of the food supply is not using genetically modified food at present, and so the key concern there, again, is to look at evidence-based studies around the nutritional value, but also making sure that they're stable in the environment of any animal that might be modified. Currently, the food supply that we have is really more from the sort of classic way that you would produce animals. A strain of animals like chickens, for example, that would be higher meat-producing chicken, but not most of those are not genetically modified.
So that's not genetic modified. I think a lot of folks are under that impression, but that's just crossbreeding.
Exactly. That's the normal process of reproduction.
Okay. And so anything up next in terms of what's any big developments on the horizon for the school in 2014?
Well, we have too many to talk about probably on this show, but we have a lot of work in the One Health arena, but really One Health involves everything from pets, and for example, we have a brand new linear accelerator, state-of-the-art in radiation oncology that we just installed. That will allow us to precision, in a very precise way, be able to treat tumors in dogs and cats.
And we're going to leave it right there.
Okay.
And that's our show. Thanks to our guest, Dean Michael Larimore. And thanks to you for watching. For Studio Sacramento, I'm Scott Syfax. See you next time right here on KVIE.
At Five Star Bank, community is at the heart of what we do. Every day we strive to have thoughtful solutions for our customers and help our communities prosper. Honest dialogue about the issues affecting the region is vitally important to that prosperity. We are proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
All episodes of Studio Sacramento, along with other KVIE programs, are available to watch online at kvie.org/video.